Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My blood pressure is slightly high, so I won't delay the start any further. Patrick has arrived. He is here. Elvis is not leaving the building. But welcome. My name's Andrew Grant. I'm the head of the Political Risk and Trade Credit Department at Clyde Co. Just a brief introduction for those who are not familiar with Clyde's. We're an international law firm spread across the globe. Each time I stand up, I get to announce a new office. We are now in Jakarta and Chongqing in China, but we're not talking about Asia this morning. We're here to talk about Nigeria, but we are across the globe. We're an international law firm. Our experience is extensive in Nigeria itself. Here are some of the examples of the matters we handle. At Clyde's, we've always focused on our core sectors: insurance, international trade, energy, aviation, insurance, and the shipping industry, and oil and gas. All of that is related to Nigeria. We have extensive experience. Grace Asamoto is in the audience. She's holding her hand up. She is from Nigeria and regularly travels there, as do many of our other lawyers. Please do ask me afterwards if you have any questions about the services we offer, or Grace, or any of the other representatives from Clyde's. This is my team here in London. We're obviously a much more extensive law firm than just the team, but there are many of those here. Please do talk to any of them about anything that you may require or need to know about us. Enough of me, because we're already against the clock, so I'll leave it to Noel to introduce Patrick.
Good morning and welcome. Menas Associates, for those who don't know it, as a consultancy company, but we also produce publications. We've just recently revamped our two Nigerian ones, Nigeria Focus and Nigeria Politics and Weekly. I won't go through this, but there are several members of Menas here who will be able to tell you more about Menas if you wish. So I'm going to go straight on and introduce Patrick. Again, Patrick I hardly need to introduce, as I think he's probably well known to everybody here as one of the leading experts on Africa, editor of Africa Confidential for many years, and I think a great speaker. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Greetings. My apologies. Slight mix-up on the transport. Can I just go straight through this?
It's the next one, I think.
The next one. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, we're talking about Nigeria this week at a rather important juncture. As we speak, there are these officials in the Nigerian Statistics Bureau currently working on rebasing the economy in Nigeria. That is going back to the statistical roots of the composition of growth. That's an exercise Ghana did 3 years ago, and it hasn't been done in Nigeria for over 20 years. Now, when Ghana did it, it was a similar gap. It's about 20 years before, and it resulted in a 60% increase in the size of the Ghanaian economy. So almost overnight, Ghana went from a lesser developed country to a lower middle income country, with all the implications that has for access to finance. Nigeria is already a mixed country in terms of World Bank classification, but the importance there is that in terms of the biggest economy in Africa, South Africa's been in that position unchallenged for many years, with Egypt and Algeria coming up behind, and now Nigeria is in second place. And the likelihood is that Nigeria will certainly level peg with South Africa, but many people believe it will, by the end of next year, become the biggest economy in Africa. Of course, that's yeah, I mean, that sounds impressive. Of course, it's a bit like the China effect. I mean, when the Chinese economy overtakes the US economy, yes, it has a symbolic implication, but it doesn't alter the fact that in terms of the GDP per capita measurement, you've got the average Nigerian will have a GDP per capita of around under $2,000, and the average South African will have a GDP per capita of around 7,500. But it will certainly boost Nigeria's claims to become a continental leader, to have a seat at the UN Security Council, and to speak for Africa with new force. So I think it's a very important moment. And of course, there's an election looming in 2014, 2015, and doubtless the government will seize this opportunity to say, well, we are the government that presided over the elevation of Nigeria to the biggest economy in Africa. However faulty that claim may be, it will certainly be one they will make. Another indication of the growing size of the economy, the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Arunmo Ote, says that they aim to have 500 companies listed on the Nigeria Stock Exchange by 2016, and the target is a market capitalization of $1 trillion. Again, that's extremely optimistic, but it does show that there's been an increasing enthusiasm to list in Nigeria. Under Ruma Otta, who is a very experienced financial manager. She was head of Treasury at the African Development Bank before. She's got a very good international representation. And part of that is not just to get international firms in, but that's into joint ventures with local companies, but to get local companies to move away from the sort of the family structure to become listed and to boost Nigeria's capital markets and money markets and boost its access to finance. And what one sees as countries move from a sort of frontier market status to emerging market status, the importance of ratings, the importance of raising money through the bond markets and through the capital markets gets greater and greater, and has in many cases a salutary effect on policy, because government is not just mediating policy through its own political elite and the elections and so on, but also the way it's perceived by ratings agencies, the dreaded Standard & Poor's and Fitch and so on. So again, that changes the nature of doing politics and managing the economy. The elections I mentioned earlier, I think we're writing saying are the biggest test since the return to civil rule in 1999. That's partly because until now the ruling People's Democratic Party has had a pretty easy run of it. It's the what is it? It's the PRI of Nigeria. It's the the Japanese Liberal Democratic Party of Nigeria. It's just been there unchallenged. Effectively, you've got a divided opposition that's never really been able to get the traction to challenge it. It's got its grip on the patronage and it's consolidated its rule over the past 14 years very effectively. But now, for the first time, it does face a challenge, and that challenge comes from a somewhat unlikely coalition of more leftist supporters in the southwest from the Action Congress of Nigeria initially, and the former military ruler, General Muhammadu Buhari, who was leading the Progressive Congress. Now, they formed an alliance now which gives them strong backing in the southwest and across the north. Their challenge is, of course, can they pick a winning ticket? Most people say that Buhari is likely to be their candidate, and the question around that is how acceptable he is to southern Nigerians. The government is trying to paint him as some sort of extremist. I don't think that's necessary. It's certainly not justified, having met the man many times. But it does narrow the odds. It means there's going to be a much tighter fight for the presidency. And given the patronage and the power that goes with the presidency, that's a fight that's going to go right across the political system. Jonathan's big claim will be that he presided over the privatization of the electricity industry and he established reliable power supplies across the country. He certainly presided over it. It actually started in 2002 and it's been going on at a rather slow pace for the past 11 years. But he's actually signed the contracts and brought in the process of bringing in $20 billion of investment from China Power, from Brazil Power, and General Electric in the States. So there's real substance to this. The companies have been set up, and there's real optimism that it won't be the cheapest power in the world, but it will certainly be a lot more reliable than what Nigerians have grown used to. Another parallel development, which I think is very, very important, is Aliko Dangote, who is Nigeria's and indeed Africa's richest businessman. He's worth over $20 billion if you want to tap in for some investment. He has corralled some $9.3 billion to build a 440,000 barrel a day oil refinery in Ondo State, together with a petrochemicals plant and a fertilizer factory in that area. And Ondo State is midway between Port Harcourt, which is the capital of Nigeria's oil industry, and Lagos, which is the commercial capital. So it's a very smart position, very smart move. The question is, will it pay off? Dangote's put $3 billion of his own money. He's also gone to international banks, Standard Chartered, and they're leading the international syndication, and Nigeria's Guarantee Trust Bank is leading the local syndication. It is the biggest domestic-led project ever in Nigeria. The significance of it is that for 30, 40 years, all of Nigeria's refineries have been state-managed, or I should perhaps say state mismanaged. They haven't ever turned a profit, they haven't even broken even, and in fact they've become a kind of conduit for massive political patronage. The fuel hasn't come in sufficient numbers, so Shell and BP and Total and all the European companies have made huge amounts of money shipping refined petroleum products to Nigeria that is a major oil producer. It's absolute madness, but it's gone on for 30, 40 years. And it's fed the political elite. So Dangote's now got the guts to turn around and say, we should be doing this locally. I'm going to get the local fuel here, I'm going to refine it, and not only am I going to refine it for Nigerians, I'm going to target an export market. So I'm actually going to displace all these foreign exporters of petroleum products to West Africa, and I'm going to be the supplier. So it's a grand ambition. And I think it's one really to watch. It's a signifier of the new enthusiasm in the private sector in Nigeria, which I'll go on later, which is an entirely different story from the political story. In other words, what you're seeing is that the business emerging capitalist class in Nigeria are saying, right, at least we know what we can do, we've got the resources, we've got the know-how, we've got the international networks, we're going to do this, and the politicians just better get out of the way because it's good for them. If this works, it's going to mean far more money in the exchequer, far more money for the politicians to spend on social investment and so on. So it is, in that corny slogan, a win-win, if it works. Of course, there are a lot of ifs. We can talk about those later. Now, this is the other reason why the government quite likes what Dangote is doing. They've got something called the National Transformation Project, which is all about moving on from the oil and gas industry to a more sustained and diverse economy. That means doing exactly what Dangote is using oil and gas feedstock to develop a petrochemicals industry, to develop a local gas distribution industry that can provide the feedstock for power stations. In other words, to modernize and industrialize the Nigerian economy for all 170 million people, not just for the sort of the privileged elite in Lagos and Abuja. So that's the transformation agenda spelled out by the government, and they're lucky enough to have people like Dangote who are actually doing it on the ground. But, and there is a big but, it's the issue of political stability, and most of all, that revolves around the insurgency in northeast Nigeria. Last night, the US government registered Boko Haram as an international terrorist group, which, shock horror, means they won't be doing any business with Boko Haram. It's been it's been a controversial decision because people say, well, you know, you're not really ramping this up. You know, Boko Haram is not Al-Qaeda or... there's a debate about it, whether by internationalizing it and raising the profile, that's exactly what they want. I mean, it's like, you know, if you're in that business, that line of business, it's almost like an accolade. Well, the great Satan is at last declaring war. It's at last banning us. So there's a big argument about what the implications of this. I think what it does mean is it's an escalation. You could argue, and some would, because the activities of Boko Haram in the northeast have been absolutely murderous. No question about that, that action is needed. But whether it's just military action and just finger-wagging, or there needs to be a political process of engagement and even negotiation, is very much an open question. The government talks about a two-track strategy of political and military tactics. But what we're seeing is that Boko Haram, despite the state of emergency in 3 of the northeastern states in Nigeria, the organization is still moving around the country, still killing people at will, usually defenseless citizens, and tragically, it's getting away with it, and it's moving back to its bases, and it's now spreading across to the northwest. Last week there were attacks in Kano, which is the biggest commercial city in the northwest, and a fairly well-run place at that, and has been, apart from a really bad attack about 2 years ago, Kano's been relatively free from Boko Haram attacks. So the worry is that they're spreading their ambition across the entire north. The other big source of instability is President Jonathan's own home base in the Niger Delta. He came in, if you remember, if you've been following Nigeria, he came in when President Umaru Yar'Adua was very sick, and he was a deputy president. Together they put together a program for the Niger Delta, which consisted of an amnesty program, a program to reintegrate the fighters, the militants who had been campaigning against the government and the oil company, and to clean up the delta, suck up the pollution, the polluted oil and the other detritus, and reinvigorate the environment and return it to what was used to be very fertile agricultural land and fishing grounds. I was there last week, and I have to say very little progress has been made on the environmental cleanup. In terms of the militants, yes, it's true. Some of the most entrepreneurial militants have got extremely good security contracts. There's a guy called Government Tom Polo who has a $130 million contract. It's called the Maritime Security Contract. Reminds me a bit of, we have a private security company here. They've got a contract in Iraq for $150 million. So it's the same sort of process, you know. There's always good business if you know how to use a gun, I guess. Tom Polo and his friends have got these contracts. But of course, there's another group of militants that have been left out of this process. And they seem to be pretty miffed. They didn't want to go for the amnesty, they didn't want to go for the retraining, but they did want the contracts, and they haven't got them. So there's a resentment there. What you're seeing is attacks on pipelines and so on are increasing. And also, the pirate attacks and ship hijackings are increasing to such an extent that the latest report from Chatham House says that hijacking in the Gulf of Guinea is now a more serious problem than the Somali-based pirates who are attacking ships in the Indian Ocean, that major shipping route between the Middle East and Asia. So that's very bad news if you're shipping oil and gas. Having said that, the pirates generally tend to be a fairly, quote-unquote, humanitarian bunch, as long as you pay up. If you don't, you may be in trouble. But the idea is quickly get on the ships, get the money, get everything worth having off the ships, and then scarper. That's the modus operandi. But of course, it does send shivers up the spines of both the maritime operators and, of course, the insurance companies. I don't know what it does for the law firms, but probably it's good. So, the other question is, what is the government doing about this? So this week, two big events. Actually, since hot off the press, it was actually true yesterday, when this went to press, that the President was going to read the budget in the National Assembly. They've now delayed that for a week, I guess, for internal discussions or whatever. So that's next week. But the other big event this week that I wanted to talk about was the election of the governor of Anambra State, which is one of those watershed events because essentially it marks a starting gun for the national election season, which you say, well, we're November 2013. They're saying it's not till early 2015, but it's going to be a long campaign. There's no question about that. And the election in Anambra State is really going to be a signifier in terms of what goes on there. Just some details on the 2014 budget. The Finance Minister, Ngozi Konjo-Iweala, who I guess most of you know, she was a candidate for the presidency of the World Bank. Huge international plaudits as an economist and an operator. She's actually done a rather, I think, unsung job in managing the macroeconomy. She's got Nigeria's budget deficit. They're targeting a 1.9% deficit out of GDP, but actually it's around about 2.3%. You compare that to Germany, America, France, Britain even. It's no small feat, actually. Given the huge demands on the government treasury in Nigeria for things like health, education, roads, power, and so on. So that alone is quite an achievement. And she's now trying to really pull the rabbit out of the hat and cut state spending from $5 trillion, that's 31 billion, to 4.4. That's about a 10% cut next year. And as I said, that's in an election year. No one really thinks she's going to pull it off. But what she's trying to do, I think, is to mark out the territory and say, right, this is the target, this is what we're going to do. And one of the targets are all these so-called ghost workers cutting the public sector payroll. Her mission is to move from recurrent spending to capital spending, longer-term investment, to get the government out of a lot of stuff, to privatize a lot of stuff, and to get that off the government books, and to hire less people, but hopefully for better wages, because civil service wages are still way, way down in comparison to the commercial sector in Nigeria, and to do this in an election year, that's some feat. What people think is they'll make the announcement next Tuesday. It will be what she wants, because she generally gets what she wants when it comes to figures. But there will then be pressure halfway through the year. Well, we've got to do this project, we've got to do that project. So I would expect next year, in the run-up to the election, a lot of sort of very political project spending. Oh, well, we're going to, where are we weak? We're weak in the middle belt. Let's have a couple of projects there. There'll be some groundbreaking ceremonies and so on. So it's a game, but I think the real message is that the economy the macroeconomy has been very, very well managed over the last 2 or 3 years. Said that, so growth is 6.75%. That's down actually on the 10-year average of around 7.1%. The oil output is 2.39 million barrels a day. Again, that's the base. In fact, oil has slipped under 2 million. The unfortunately, the crises in Libya and Syria have had a salutary effect for Nigeria, and they've actually pushed up the price to 110 a barrel. There's concern about the excess crude account. That's fallen. That's the money above government spending and required money to fund the budget that is being held in a so-called rainy day account. And there have been a few rainy days, clearly, in the last year, so the level of that account has fallen from 9 billion to 5 billion. As I said, her target is to cut recurrent spending, to which she has been successful so far, but the fear is, despite her best efforts, it's going to go up over the next year for political as much as any other demands. The other big issue to note on the economic front is the fuel subsidy payments. You may remember a couple of years ago there were mass protests against the lifting of the fuel subsidy. The government wanted to knock it out altogether, knock it 100% off. They've now reneged and gone set it at around 50%. So that has enabled them to cut the cost of that program, but it's still a huge amount of money, and it's still an extremely questionable scheme with all sorts of oil companies and entrepreneurs getting involved in claiming their money, sometimes for spurious reasons. Foreign exchange reserves are up to 46 billion, comfortably, I think, three months import cover, fairly comfortable. And inflation is down to below 9%. That's lower than the regional average, if you're interested. Now, just a couple of words about the Anambra elections. They're going to take place on Saturday. And the interest is that it's the first time that the All Progressives Congress have really sort of formed up and taken on the government. It's not quite quite an obvious fight, because the PDP, the ruling party, the People's Democratic Party, are themselves in a bit of a quandary over their candidate. So they're backing another candidate from the APGA because he stands the best chance of beating the APC. So the real thing to watch in this election is whether the All Progressives Congress win it or not. If they win it, then it's really significant for them, because it means they put a good campaign together, and the Southeast is the sort of bailiwick of Jonathan and the PDP. Jonathan's very much reliant on getting votes from the Niger Delta and from the Southeast. If he can't hold Anambra, then that's quite bad news for him. So that's just, the big question is just how well the elections are going to be managed. Atiru Jega is the director of the Independent National Electoral Commission. He's an academic, and he's very well regarded. He was a civil society activist. I think the critique of him is that he's not a logistician. And in the past, it's been found that the best people, weirdly enough, to manage elections are military types. People who know how to make, unlike me, know how to make planes run on time and trains run on time and things, and they get the voting materials out there on time. He's not that, and there were a lot of screw-ups on the logistical side under the last elections. But I think I'm sure some of the opposition politicians would argue about this. But I see him as a man of integrity. But he will come under huge pressure in these elections, because they're likely to be really, really tight. So he's another character to watch. He's actually, if you're interested, I think the Royal African Society is hosting him next week. He's going to be in London, so it'll be quite interesting, and probably doing a bit of television as well. So this election season, as I say, is kicking off with the Anambra by-election. And I think really that effectively starts the whole process. So we've effectively got almost 18 months of electioneering. And that means all the policy debates are going to be extremely politicized. It also means there's going to be a lot of attention on what is going on within the ruling People's Democratic Party. As I said, it's been this monolith so far. But what's happened under Jonathan is that the various regional factions that make up the party cannot agree on who they want to lead the party. And that's going to come in the form of a challenge to Jonathan's leadership as their presidential candidate in 2015. And that challenge appears to be overwhelmingly coming from the north. There's 6 state governors from the northern states taking him on, led by Sule Lamido, who was foreign minister under President Obasanjo, and Babangida Nyako from, Aliyu Babangida from Niger State, and Kwankwaso from Kano State. So we've got some heavy hitters who protested against the way these elections, the internal elections of the PDP are organized. They walked out of the PDP National Congress in August and formed their own faction called the New PDP. So they're currently in limbo. They're talking to the opposition All Progressives Congress. They're also talking to the mainstream PDP, but they're at the moment in limbo. Now, their significance is if they walk out of the PDP into the arms of the APC, they're going to change the arithmetic of the National Assembly. It means that the opposition are going to be in the majority in the Senate and in the House, and they're going to control the majority of states. That's really, really important when it comes to organizing the elections, because it means that incumbent state governors on the opposition side are going to be in the majority. They're going to have the say over how these elections are organized state by state, or they're certainly going to clash with the federal police when it comes to the nitty-gritty of that. So tactically, strategically, it's very, very important what happens to that. And those talks are going on. We should get a sense in the next month or so of whether these errant governors are going to leave the PDP and join the APC, and what the terms of their departure will be, what jobs they will get in the opposition, or whether they want to stay with Jonathan. Staying with Jonathan is the secure thing to do because they're with the big power at the moment, but they know that if they leave, they're really going to expose him to some political difficulties come the election campaign. So I said that the critical thing is the internal primary elections for the presidential nomination. Now the worry on a bigger picture of all this is that you've got a situation where the ruling party, having once been the real national party and the big national monolith, is now a more factional party, and the opposition is combining its support in the north with its support in the southwest, and taking on the opposition, taking on the ruling PDP. And there's a danger of all sorts of regional politics being played, identity politics, and indeed religious politics, because then you would find most of Nigeria's Muslims would be backing the APC, or would be in APC supporting states. And that is a pretty alarming prospect, and it's something that I think the shall we say, the more responsible members of the PDP have got see very strongly as a risk, and they're trying to claw back their support in the north. But that, again, is a sort of division we've never seen in Nigerian politics before. So, where it's been a very pluralistic system. So the idea of sort of a South Party and a North Party, and it's not that sustainable, because I think if the PDP went that route, it just couldn't win an election, and it knows it. So somehow it's got to claw back some support from the North and Middle Belt, but it's not going to be easy under present circumstances. That's just to really reiterate that. So its heartlands are now in the Niger Delta, the South-South states, the oil-producing states, and the South-East states. Plateau and the Middle Belt states such as Plateau and Benue, and the APC is strong in the southwest. So having sort of cast the southwest group in the APC They're sort of social democrats. They believe in a lot of social investment. They're doing a lot. If you go to a kitty state, for example, you see they're investing a lot in education, 1 laptop per child, and all those sorts of things, and in public goods. Lagos, if any of you have been to Lagos recently, you'll see, under Fashola that there's been a lot of social investment there, and also some really good projects. They're trying to, again, build on the sort of the legacy, which goes back really sort of 5 decades to Chief Obafemi Awolowo and his free education campaign and so on. So they're taking up that history and running with it. So they've got that tradition of social investment, which again plays very well in the north, which has really been starved of investment generally over the last few decades. So the other big development is Jonathan's national conversation, which is this idea. Some people think he just sort of plucked it out of the air when he was giving his independence speech, saying, well, we've got this crisis. The economy is doing very well, but we've got this crisis. We need a national conversation. Well, whether he did pluck it out of the air or not, it has turned into a viable program. And they've set up in every state, they've got these national conference coordinators, and they're trying to get this onto the agenda. No one's quite clear what the political impact of it is. The backers of it really want to go with it and turn it into what they call a sovereign national conference, which means you sit down and you say, right, we're going to restructure the Constitution. However we're chosen, we're going to draft these proposals to change the structure of power at local government, state level, federal level, and so on, and then put them to the electorate via a referendum. So it won't just be a talking shop. We'll actually get political, legal, constitutional change out of this. Then the Jonathan people are at the moment saying, well, actually, it's not quite what we meant. We just thought you should talk to each other and sort of try and sober a few people up, and generally, so there's a debate even about the terms of the conference. But what you can say is that those skeptics who said, well, it's just a political stunt, they're being proved a bit wrong, because people are taking it very seriously at particularly civil society people, even some of the opposition politicians, and they want to go with it. So it's an added factor. Whether it's a diversionary factor or not, it's going to remain to be seen, but it's going to reanimate this debate about what Nigeria is and how it should be best governed, and the role of the government. I think I've gone through the Boko Haram stuff pretty well, superficially, of course, given the time, but we can certainly talk about that later in questioning. As I said, the other issue I hadn't mentioned much was the religious and ethnic clashes in the Middle Belt states, and that's the sort of the third adjunct to those concerns of stability and security. The other thing to say about Boko Haram I didn't mention was its links, at least it's a Hydra-headed group, I suppose you could say. It certainly does have links, certainly elements of it have links to groups such as Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Al-Shabaab and Mujal. And to reiterate that so far, the attempts to have negotiations between the government and its appointed mediators and Boko Haram have not yielded much in the way of observable results. Having said that, the guy who is Jonathan's national security advisor, Colonel Samba Dasuki, is extremely well regarded. Again, long sort of history in the military. He's also the nephew of the Sultan of Sokoto, who I guess is the nearest thing to Nigeria's version of King Fahd. I mean, he's the authority. No, probably more like the Archbishop of Canterbury. Actually, he's the religious authority in the country. So it's very significant that he's got that job and he's undertaking those negotiations and steering that policy. So he's got the sort of he's got the establishment behind him clearly on this. So again, I think that's very critical to watch what's happening on those negotiations if they're going to get anywhere seriously. seen that. Again, Jonathan has some important allies in the Middle Belt, Jonah Jang being one of them. There are concerns about, again, if the Middle Belt is going to be a series of, we could say, battleground states in the US parlance, then, you know, the fear is it may literally turn into battleground states if it gets close. Again, you've got Danjuma's big general, also a big investor in the oil business. Some very important characters in the ex-military rulers in the Middle Belt states. Babangida, Abdul Salam, Abubakar, and Danjuma are all from those states. So they will play a role if there's trouble there. And the other factor to remember is Bukola Saraki, who's a former governor of Kwara State, is also leading part of this new PDP group against Jonathan. So people are wanting to know what the implications of that are for Kwara. Pretty much mentioned all that Niger Delta material. And I think, as I said, both certainly in the north and in the south, there is this sort of fairly loose talk, and southeast too, actually, loose talk of succession in terms of, you know, just peeling off. I think the traditional view has been after the Civil War of the 60s, that was never really a viable possibility. Of course, the generations have moved on. And it's brought up, but I think we're talking more about the political composition of what Nigeria has, rather than sort of redefining the country. I mean, you know, people have constantly talked about breaking up Congo. I just don't see the Nigeria breakup. I mean, I know the CIA put out a report about 5 years ago predicting mayhem, and I think there are all sorts of difficulties that the country faces, but I don't see sort of tearing it apart is necessarily going to be one of them. I mean, as I said, I think a senior Nigerian diplomat put it well recently. He said, look, the question we've got to ask ourselves is where are we heading in terms of, you know, what we can compare ourselves internationally with? Are we going to Indonesia, where you had, like Nigeria, a succession of military juntas who were oppressive and corrupt? I think the Suharto regime had at that stage when Suharto was driven out, had the distinction of having stolen $20 billion. At that stage it was a world record. And now, since then, since the 90s, there's been a political process in Indonesia, and it's not reported very well, because it's going quite well. East Timor's been settled, and there's been a settlement, political settlement, and a modernization and diversification of the Indonesian economy. And a couple of books, actually, one by a pal of mine in the States, I should plug, called Peter Lewis, who's actually written a very scholarly work comparing Indonesia with Nigeria over the last 40, 50 years. And it's very instructive, actually, in terms of, you know, date by date. You know, I mean, the start of Civil War in 66 in Nigeria. In 66, there was this massive purge in Indonesia where they killed a million Chinese people. So there are lots of parallels between the two countries. I personally think that the Indonesian direction is far more likely for Nigeria. It's pluralistic, big society with lots of people, I mean 170 million, and divided in terms of faith, identity, cultures, tradition, but also there's a hell of a sense of unity. If you've ever been at a Golden Eagles match, you'll know that their national unity is also very much on the agenda. Or the alternative, as this diplomat was saying, is Pakistan, where you have similar pattern of coups, corruption, oppression, and extremism, but growing polarization and real economic failure. And I think that certainly that would be the disaster scenario. But I think in that sort of superficial journalistic way, I guess I would say Indonesia is much more of a signpost right now. mentioned the top team, Finance Minister Okonjo Iweala, Central Bank Governor Sanusi Lamido, who's due to retire next year rather. There's a lot of pressure on him to stay on to oversee that election period, because he again is a respected technician, and there's a concern that in terms of the markets, they want to see someone they've known they can deal with in that election period. He may take a half term, which would then take him up to 2016. He would certainly be greatly missed in that position. Arun Mote, and the other individual in that group is Akinwumi Adesina, who's the agriculture minister. Again, a really technical character, but who has overseen a lot of very important initiatives in the agricultural sector, widespread investment in production. And the issue is not just production, because agriculture is the business of most Nigerians. I think 80% of the workforce is engaged in agriculture, but it's all the add-ons. It's building the roads, it's getting the inputs, the fertilizer out, and also getting the products to market. There's just a story I wanted to tell you about an indication of the sorts of changes that Adesina has overseen with Sanusi. In Nigeria, people eat a lot of tomato paste. The big suppliers used to be Italy. Italy got too expensive, so then China moved in, dominated the Nigerian market. So, China had the market to supply tomato paste to 170 million people at uncompetitive rates. So Sanusi and I said, this is just nonsense. We are growing all our own tomatoes here. So they picked a place in Kaduna State. They got 8,000 farmers who were sitting on 5,000 hectares of arable land and growing tomatoes already, but couldn't sell them. And they got funding from the central bank, financed the project, brought in the inputs, fertilizers, brought in the technical capacity to then take these to a processing plant, and produced indigenous tomato paste. They've done that, and it paid its money back within the first year. I think it was an investment of about $150 million. And the good thing about it is it's now doubling production, bringing twice as many farmers in, and they're getting, instead of $350 a ton, they're getting $1,000 a ton for their tomatoes. So that's an example of the sort of thing Adesina is doing on a small level, but incredibly important for the rest of the economy, and shows the potential of agriculture. And that's the whole message, that the traditional view of agriculture, oh God, it's hard work, it's in the field, it's hot. But they're now saying we want, Adesina calls them agripreneurs. We want to bring business into agriculture and really power it. And if you look at the growth composition in Nigeria over the last 5-6 years, one of the really interesting things is just how much non-oil growth there's been. The oil sector has a lot of problems right now, but the non-oil sector, responding to things like agricultural initiatives and so forth, has been growing very, very fast because people just see it as something that's just sitting there that they can exploit, and the government has at last putting its money where its mouth is in terms of promoting it. That slide's just really talking about the complex bureaucracy surrounding policy making in Nigeria. You've got the Petroleum Industry Bill, which was first sort of put out in 2008. It's been stuck in the National Assembly and has gone through so many iterations. It's unlikely now to pass before the next elections. It's become a kind of arena of multinational interest, local political interest, and now the Delta are saying, well, we're not happy with the derivation. That is the amount of extra money the Delta gets from the oil revenue. So there's a new row over that. Cynics say, well, it suits everybody really not to change anything, because they're doing very well out of it. And I think one important thing about this, lesson about the whole oil and gas industry in Nigeria, is the opacity of it. Nigeria, as Sanusi is never tired of pointing out, doesn't know how much oil it produces from day to day. They have meters on some of the wells, on other meters, on other wells, particularly the offshore wells. No one knows. It's taking the company's word for it. And then nobody knows how the revenue is properly accounted for. For years and years and years, the state oil company, the NNPC, didn't produce audited accounts. The big idea behind the petroleum industry bill was to say, look, we can't run it like this. We have to have a well-run, legally constituted company that is quoted on the international markets and produces audited accounts, and then we will get private investment in it on the basis of the credibility of those accounts. We have to change everything around. That was the idea, and that was the great hope. And 5 years later, we're no nearer there. We've still got dominated by the state bureaucrats. There was a very good report put out by the former head of the EFCC, the Anti-Corruption Bureau, last year. Shocking report, actually. Reckoned that $100 billion of oil and gas revenues had gone west, missing, unaccounted for, over the past decade. The oil minister immediately said, well, that's just, pie in the sky. It's just, we don't see the accounts make any sense. But that report has just been, is gathering dust somewhere now, and there hasn't really been an attempt to raise that issue again. But again, for the people of the Delta in particular, it's a critical issue, just how much they're getting for that. How much?
If you like 10 minutes question now. No, we'll finish now.
Finish now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So what can I just rip through, I think? Just the other thing, I just wanted to re-emphasize how important the power issue is. The state grid currently produces 3,500 megawatts of power. The private generators, those are the big companies and the guys who are selling these sort of little generators people put on their balconies. That's 7.5. So it's over twice what the state grid produces. So the current situation means the cost of doing business is a 40% premium on it because of the failure of the electricity business. So the idea of just getting the existing capacity, which is probably around 5,000 megawatts, getting that working well and reticulated around the country, it's going to revolutionize the situation. And that is actually Jonathan's secret weapon, I think, for these elections. If he does that, and people in Lagos, in Kano, in Abuja, in Port Harcourt, in Enugu, in even Maiduguri and so on, they start seeing electricity every day of the week as a natural thing, regular supplies, reliable supplies. I think the guy's going to go down as some sort of national savior, and that's his plan. So this is very, very important that he does that for his own political career. So he's certainly motivated to do that. That's just, I've said that about that. They're looking at 20,000 target by 2020. Looks a bit ambitious. Then the importance of people like Dangote, Otudolo, Elumelu, Chukwuma. These are the new Nigerian entrepreneurs. Really, really important. The growth of this entrepreneurial capitalist class, working with the government, putting pressure on the government, acting as a real pressure group. Change your policy. Doesn't make any sense. If we don't fix this, we're heading for a political crisis that you just won't be able to control in terms of unemployment, desperation, and general sort of social disaffection. So those are the sort of arguments that are being made by this new capitalist class. Those are all the grim statistics of the oil and gas. Been through that. And also just geopolitical realities. Tanzania and Mozambique coming on as big suppliers of LNG to China and India. US, after 2020, self-sufficient in shale gas and oil, so not interested in Nigerian production. So Nigeria's markets are changing and it has to adapt. So I think we'll see a lot more regional work. But I just wanted to actually end on a positive note, actually, which was, I think last week, the Koreans were here and they had a big exhibition. I thought it was very instructive because Korea has been an incredible success story economically. I think more so than China in a way. What it's done in the period of time it's done, it's now, running behind Britain as a sort of 7th or 6th biggest economy in the world and probably about to overtake. But But they came to Britain to promote soft power. They wanted to know how the Brits managed, with this small island, managed to present themselves as this country that can have the Olympic Games and make everyone laugh and produce all these film stars and the Beatles and everything else and stuff. And the South Koreans were really interested in soft power to go with their economic power. And I think Nigeria, it's almost the other way around. They've got a lot of soft power. The writers, the artists, the filmmakers, the musicians. You now see the film industry in Nigeria went from standing start 10 years ago to something that's rivaling India. We're not talking about, the Sunday Times film critic views. We're talking about who's paying for this stuff, how many films are being produced. It's massive. It's going right across Africa. You go on Virgin Air these days, they show a Nollywood movie. So all this Half a Yellow Sun is now in the local studios. It's a Nigerian-made film with Hollywood money. So all these things are happening. So I think that gives Nigeria the opportunity to sort of redefine itself, both as this sort of cultural engine locomotive, and also, on the back of that, some sort of growing economy. So I think that's the challenge for Jonathan or whoever wins the next election, to build on that and say, well, look, it's not just, it's a growing economy, and it's got real cultural weight behind it. So I'll end on that positive note. Thank you very much for listening.
We've got about 5 minutes for questions, so anyone would like to ask a question?
Hi. You spoke a little bit about the Sanusi and the big shoes that someone has to
Yes.
fill who replaces him.
Yeah.
If he doesn't decide to take another half term,
Yeah.
what do you think are the prospects for kind of continuity in monetary policy in 2014?
Well, I think there are about 3 candidates lined up. Yeah, there's Mugalu, who's a deputy governor, who is, I know very well, he's just produced a really interesting book. I think he would be very well equipped to, and he would mark continuity because he's in the institution already. The other 2 is current head of Access Bank. Again, he's very close to Okonjo Iweala, so I guess he would be continuity of a kind. And the other candidate is Atedo Peterside, who was an economic advisor to Jonathan. So I guess those 3, you wouldn't see a big shift. It's just a question of authority within the institution as well, I guess. So it's, the policy, I don't think you see a big policy shift, but it's a question of how you run the institution, how you get the bureaucrats to work with you and so on. So I think this, and also just the markets, the conservative, they, like to deal with the people they've been dealing with, and I think there'd be a concern there. And I think the other big question, quite frankly, is what Sanusi has done, presiding over that financial reform process in 2009, sacking 6 chief executives from the banks, putting 2 in the courts. That's never been done before. It shows supreme self-confidence, a real reforming zeal, and the guts to take on vested interests. And I mean, of the other 3, I mean, I know them all a bit. I think, they're great bankers and all the rest of it. I don't know whether they've got the sort of the oomph to do that, to go there. And people say that once Sanusi goes, lets his foot off the gas, then all the old vested interests, all the old dodgy geezers will come back into the system and say, yeah, well, let's lend so-and-so a bit more money, on a margin rate and stuff like that. So I think that's the worry, that the reform push will go if he leaves early.
Yeah, hi. I'm sure you've heard about the 100-year amalgamation in Nigeria. Do you think this will have any impact next year?
You mean the sort of the 100-year sort of centenary?
Yes.
Well, I guess the government's going to try and play it, as a big event. They're presiding over it. I have to say, as a Brit, going to Nigeria, I just think all that is so long ago. It's to Nigeria of today is looking at Asia, or maybe the States or Latin America. It's not really looking back very much. There's not a lot of sort of sense of museum in Nigeria, generally speaking. So I think there'll be a bit of it, and someone will say, was this a good idea and stuff like that. But I don't think it's going to be such a big deal. I know a couple of people are doing books on it and so on. I think, one thing that's lacking a lot in Nigeria, I think, is just recent history. You've got this class of rulers, generals, business people, politicians and whatever, the last 30 years are incredibly interesting. And the key people are going quietly, one by one, to their graves. And it would be really good to get them before they go to sort of talk about what it was like, what they went through, and how the modern Nigeria has been shaped. I think in a way, maybe it's just 30 years they've got to look at, rather than 100. You know, we all know about Lou Gardner's, his time, but maybe we need to know a lot more about the last couple of decades or so. Yes, please.
Yeah, I've just spent, thanks very much for the presentation. I spent 5 years in PG in Nigeria.
Oh, right, right.
And, two questions. The first one is, there seems to be sort of a potential misalignment of interest around Mr. Dangote's refinery. As you know, you mentioned the fuel substitution.
Yeah.
And I mean, you also said there's some IOCs who bring in crude products. I think it's only Total. The rest of them are actually indigenous Nigerian companies.
Oh, they're bringing them in. They're supplied, but they buy them from the IOCs. Yeah,
but
yeah.
who actually claim the subsidies?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I'm just wondering, given that we have a new 440,000 capacity refinery,
Yeah.
it's actually the same as the 4 existing ones.
Yeah.
There's a misalignment there politically because all sides, Mr. Dangote and are all very well politically connected.
Yeah.
How do you see that playing out? Because you said there's a challenge to that refinery, and that seems to be a key one.
Yeah, well, I asked Okonjo-Iweala that very question. I said, look, how's the economics of this going to work? You've got a 50% subsidy, and she said, look, he's made a lot of money. He's done his sums. I have no doubt he knows he's going to make money out of it. And what he's going to do, I think he's going to use his political connections. He's going to get the NNPC oil at cost. They buy the refinery oil at cost, yeah? So he's going to get that oil at cost, and he's going to sell it at whatever the market will allow him to sell it at. So even if he has this, he's allowed to sell it at the full price, so much luckier for him. He won't get snagged in that subsidy scheme, because unlike Total and the Glencores and the Totals and Vitols, he's going to be buying Nigerian oil. That's the one deal he's done. He's got access to Nigerian crude. That is the point of that deal. So he's going to get access at discounted rates. I think it's going to work myself. And knowing how ruthless he is, he's going to make sure everyone works properly in the refinery. There's no dodginess and so on. So I think it's.
And then the second part is, do you get a sense that either the current administration or the incoming one has a real sense of the strategic direction they want to take the industry? Because at the moment, there's a lot of M&A activities.
Yep.
Some existing producers, some maybe here actually moving out, and there's a number of indigenous entities who have been set up with international capital.
Yep.
They're taking on some of these assets. At the same time, the last licensing in 2005, 6, 7, the companies that have come in, 80% of them have actually left Nigeria.
Yep.
And we have the PIB there. We don't need to go into that. It's
Yep.
a headache on its own. But then, do they understand that actually there are alternative markets, like West Africa, East Africa, actually other companies are going into?
Yep.
Because ultimately, no one's increasing the base of reserves, and there's hardly actually any exploration drilling going on, apart from this M&A onshore Western Eastern Delta activity. That's serious implications going forward. And do you get a sense that we actually understand, or the Nigerian government understands, that they're in a very precarious situation?
I think the non-technical people in the government are really blasé about it. People put that to them. They say, listen, look at the figures. I think 50 wells were drilled in Ghana, and also 50 wells were drilled in Angola over the last 3 years. I think 5 wells were drilled in Nigeria.
4 deep water wells in Nigeria.
How many?
4 deep water wells in
4.
Nigeria. And then 3 of them were dry holes.
Yeah.
And we've got a Gina FPSO contract being awarded soon.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing going on.
No, absolutely, and I think they're blasé. I think it is it's a longer term risk how they position themselves, and I think there are two things. Obviously, the PIB is slowing everything down. The other bit is what are the local companies doing, and they're. I guess Karim and Shoreline. So he says confidently there will be no foreign companies onshore in 5 years' time. He says it will all be done by indigenous companies, like his kind of indigenous companies with a partnership deal. He's predicting they'll be producing 300,000. I mean, and they're much more aggressive in terms of digging the last bit of oil. But in terms of the big oil, where you get your 2 million, 2.5 million, even 3 million a day, that's not going to cut it. You've got to go into to deep water. And I agree. And I don't think you can just leave it to China. What you want is a nice mix. So you've got the Chinese competing with the Brits and the French and the Americans all and you can then get the best terms. But I agree. I mean, I think it's a massive failure of, if you like, oil diplomacy of the government to sort of sell Nigeria, and it's a mess. And you think you've got a president for the first time from the oil-producing area. You think he's the guy to say, well, this is my area. I owe it to this area to develop this area, use this revenue to do it. And you haven't seen that. In fact, you've seen the opposite. You've seen an opacity in that sector, I think, you know, which rivals the worst days of the military, really. So, yeah, I agree, absolutely. So.
I'm very sorry, we have to stop here, but Patrick will be around for in the next room where the coffee was, if you want to ask any questions to him directly. But can I just say on all your behalf, thank you very much.
Thank you for being so patient.
Again.
Yeah. Sorry.